Hi, my name is Amanda Montoya, and I'm an associate professor of psychology at UCLA. Today we're going to talk about running a lab that does registered reports. So whether you're a principal investigator, lab manager, or managing a large team that does registered reports, this video is for you. By the end of this video, you'll be able to articulate some of the unique considerations for registered report when you're running the team. You'll also have some ideas about techniques for addressing these issues, like adopting registered reports for the first time and team management, handling time-sensitive studies, and alignment with funding. As a principal investigator, you are in charge of keeping your lab and team moving forward with multiple projects at the same time. I always describe my role as a PI like juggling. It's your job to keep all of the balls in the air just enough to keep every ball going. As a PI, you have to think about your team, making sure they're getting the training they need and the tools to become successful researchers. You also have to monitor many different projects, ensuring that each is making progress towards completion. Finally, as a PI, you're typically managing funding, both acquiring new funding and managing existing funding. I want to start with some advice for getting started with your first registered report. Hopefully this training has convinced you that you want to get started, but how do you start with your first one? If you haven't ever done so, we recommend starting with a pre-registration. You'll get practice with writing down your plans with a little less stress about waiting for the peer review process. But likely, once you've done a pre-registration and then dealt with peer reviews, you'll immediately see the benefit of registered reports. One of my graduate students did a pre-registration to start, and once we got to the peer review process, the reviewers disagreed with some of the pre-registered decisions. This made it very clear why registered reports are so beneficial. When you're starting your first registered report, you want to be thoughtful about what project you're going to select. Some characteristics that I recommend focusing are, first, a project where there is a clear hypothesis or research question being answered, rather than something that's more exploratory or generative. Registered reports are completely possible in these situations, but having experience with the prototypical registered report will help get you started. Something else you'll want to consider is choosing a project that's not time sensitive. Getting used to doing a registered report can take some time and needs a little bit of patience. So being in a rush or trying to meet other deadlines while you're doing a registered report can be a little too stressful. You'll also want to choose a project that uses a procedure that you know pretty well. Whether this is the way that you collect data or analyze data, this will help you write a stage 1 manuscript that is sufficiently detailed because you have a lot of experience with these procedures. The next thing that you'll want to think about is choosing your team. Especially if you're not the one with the boots on the ground leading the team, you want to work with someone who values open science. This will help them through the hard times when registered reports can be a little bit tricky and push through those learning curves to get the full benefit. You also want someone who will be around for the entire project. Dealing with team changes in the middle of a registered report can be complicated, so with your first one, try to choose a team that's going to stick it through. Finally, you want to incorporate someone on your team who has experience with registered reports. This could be a colleague who's done a registered report before. Even if their expertise is not in the same area, having a co-author who has some experience with registered reports can help streamline your learning process. Once you've started your first registered report, you might get a little registered report happy. It's a little like saying a person with a hammer only sees nails, or once you pop, you just can't stop. But I recommend waiting until your first registered report has an in-principle acceptance. A lot of the learning happens in the stage 1 review process, and you want to get the full benefit of your first registered report before starting the next one. Otherwise, you might make the same mistake in multiple projects. As you get more familiar with registered reports, you'll want to start planning for staff turnover. The same staff that helps develop the stage 1 proposal may not be involved at stage 2. This means that you'll want to develop strong training, documentation, and protocols so that as new researchers join the lab, they can slot into existing projects. You can also start to stack your trainees, so thinking about graduate students and postdocs and their involvement in registered reports. It might seem intuitive to have a graduate student or postdoc start with a stage 1 and see the project all the way through. But actually what we recommend is that a new trainee work on implementing a registered report, so doing the data collection and preparing the stage 2 manuscript. This gets them familiar with taking a plan and putting it into action. Then they can contribute to the next stage 1 manuscript, having learned and internalized a lot about what makes a good plan. It is important, though, to make sure that your lab's authorship policies are very clear, especially when you're splitting trainees across projects. The next thing I want to talk about is time management. What you're probably used to with traditional papers is conducting the research up front, preparing the manuscript, and then going through a very long peer review process. This can involve submitting to many different journals, or journal shopping as it's sometimes called. You may also have to collect new data as part of the peer review process or conduct new analyses. Often the process feels short because it's not top of mind while it's on the desk of reviewers and editors. At least in my field, each round of peer review can take 6 months, so this entire process can take a very long time. Registered reports are different, and time is broken up in a slightly different way. A lot of the work is front-loaded, so it may feel different and slower. This is very natural, but really what's happening is the time is being saved on the back end. You typically start by preparing your stage 1 manuscript, and based on our research, you should plan for a typical review period at a single journal. Here, though, you do not have to collect extra data or conduct extra analyses because you can change your plan rather than add to what you've already done because you haven't already done it. We recommend being ready to conduct your research right away after receiving an in-principle acceptance. I describe this as my PI spidey sense. You can usually tell when the last round of peer review is going to happen and start preparing so that your study is ready to run right when you receive that in-principle acceptance. Preparation of the final manuscript should be shorter than writing a traditional paper because half of it is already written, or maybe even more than half. And the peer review process on the back end should be shorter since issues with the methods can't be introduced at this point. The next issue that I want to talk about is time-sensitive studies. As you get more experience with registered reports, you may want to run time-sensitive studies. For example, studies that need to be run on a specific timeline, like the academic school year or within a certain grant period. Aligning a registered report peer review process with time-sensitive studies can be kind of difficult. I worked on a project that initially intended to be a registered report, but at the point at which we needed to start collecting data, the beginning of the academic year, we decided to pull the stage 1 submission and do a pre-registration instead. I've also heard similar studies from dissertations. In these cases, pre-registration is a good alternative because you don't have to wait for peer review and it can be done on your own time. Additionally, scheduled review can help keep a project on schedule. Peer community and registered reports offer scheduled reviews. One of my PhD students did this with her dissertation, and she received her reviews within 9 days. The last issue that I want to discuss is incorporating registered reports into funding. There are 4 ways that registered reports can help with funded projects. In-principle acceptances can increase the fundability of a project as the study is already accepted for publication at a specific journal. And if you've ever felt the stomach full of dread when your first year status report comes around and you don't have much to show for it, you're not alone. Our team and the research subjects that we've talked to have found that reporting a registered report under review or an in-principle acceptance in an early status report helps bolster trust with your funder and helps relieve that feeling of dread. Registered reports accepted in principle can also be used as a good rationale for a no-cost extension. The research is already accepted at a journal, we just need to finish data collection. Finally, with traditional papers, there is a long time lag between completing a project and actually publishing it. So many grants close out before the projects are actually published. With a registered report, you're going to create a way to demonstrate upon closure of your grant that you'll deliver on the final product. As a PI, you're also responsible for allocating the resources that you have. Everybody wants to conduct the highest quality research that they can, but this can also be very expensive. It can feel risky to pursue something that might not pan out. Registered reports offer a guaranteed payoff prior to allocating resources to a specific study. I talked to a colleague recently who was thinking about spending $30,000 on a longitudinal fMRI study, and I tried to convince him that maybe a registered report was the best way to go for that study. Reflections on scientific breakthroughs also suggest that riskier projects lead to big leaps in scientific fields. But risky projects are not always guaranteed to reap a reward for the researcher who conducts them. You may find yourself wondering about running a specific study or pursuing a question, but unsure because it's kind of risky. Registered reports offer a way to get a pre-commitment to publish the results of a study regardless of how they come out. This can allow us to pursue riskier questions. In summary, as a PI, you're responsible for your team, your projects, and your financial support. This can put a lot of pressure on you to avoid making changes even when you know that they're beneficial in the long run. Registered reports are a new way of publishing, and because they change the workflow of research, this can feel like a big switch and it can throw a wrench in your lab. We recommend starting slow and learning from each project as you go. At this point in my lab, registered reports are the default, but it didn't start that way. We started with one and we slowly continued to add more. Registered reports can affect the way that your lab manages both your time and your team. This can take some time to get used to, and it does not need to happen overnight. Incorporate these changes slowly and figure out what works for your lab. Conducting time-sensitive studies as registered reports is possible, especially with scheduled review, but it's also okay to acknowledge that not every project can be a registered report, and you can use pre-registration as an alternative. Finally, many researchers are concerned about how to incorporate the timing of registered reports with the timing of funding. We found that registered reports seem to work well with funding models, whether the in-principle acceptance occurs before, early, or even late in the grant process. Hopefully this video has given you some ideas about how you can incorporate registered reports into your lab. Thanks, and we'll see you in the next video.